there's one final way that we're going to talk about to make your argument stronger. And that final method, that final thing we can do, opposing viewpoints. And you might think that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Opposing viewpoints are going to weaken our argument, aren't they? Well, if you do it incorrectly, sure. You're probably also thinking we're not supposed to do neutral essays, right? We're supposed to have our own position and support our one position. Yes. However, you can strengthen your own argument by acknowledging the opposing viewpoint and then explaining why it is not correct. So you don't want to give credit to the opposing viewpoint. If you bring up the opposing viewpoint, you want to spend the majority of the space around that completely tearing it apart. The point here is that if you know that your audience is going to respond one way, or if you have information that kind of supports a different viewpoint, if you can address that before anyone has the opportunity to think about it, right? Or if you know that that's going to be something that your reader's like, well, what about this? If you address it yourself and explain why it's not correct, it can make your argument stronger. But you have to be careful, because if you give too much credit to the opposing viewpoint, if you don't adequately kind of tear it down and explain why it's not correct, you end up weakening your argument. If you would like to incorporate the opposing viewpoint, it's not, so here's one thing, right? This is not mandatory. I want to make that completely clear. You do not need to include an opposing viewpoint. It is totally optional to do. And that's kind of what this last point is saying. It's not required. But if you do it well, it can help you with the sophistication point. It's one of many ways to work towards that sophistication point, but it can help you with the sophistication point, right? Looking at the rubric, responses that earn this point may demonstrate sophistication of thought and/or a complex understanding of the rhetorical situation by doing any of the following. The second thing there, articulating the implications or limitations of an argument by situating it within a broader context. In other words, including this additional information, right, that may limit your own argument, but then explaining why it's not correct can make your argument more sophisticated and stronger. If you want to include an opposing viewpoint, the way I would recommend doing it, pretty much the only way I would recommend doing it, is making it your last body paragraph. So have maybe 2 body paragraphs that have claims that support your thesis, and then make the opposing viewpoint paragraph your last body paragraph. You'll introduce the opposing viewpoint at the beginning of that paragraph, right? You might say, like, some people think this, or, whatever. And then immediately state a claim about why it is incorrect. And then the rest of that body paragraph will provide evidence and commentary related to your claim that the opposing viewpoint is wrong. So the claim of your body paragraph isn't going to be the opposing viewpoint. Your claim is going to be the opposing viewpoint is wrong. And then all of your evidence and commentary will support that claim. That is, if you choose to include an opposing viewpoint, that is the way to do it. Definitely, I want to bring this up. Definitely do not bring up an opposing viewpoint in the conclusion. The only time you want to bring up an opposing viewpoint is if you give yourself enough room to discredit it. If you bring it up in the conclusion, your conclusion is, first of all, not supposed to bring up new ideas, but you're not going to be able to discredit it in the conclusion because the conclusion is supposed to just be reconnecting everything back to your thesis. Let's do some practice here. Let's try to come up with an opposing viewpoint or incorporate an opposing viewpoint. Okay. So here's your task. Identify the opposing viewpoint or the opposing argument for each of these theses and write a claim that disputes it. Just focus on the claim for now. Don't focus on evidence or commentary. Just identify what the opposing viewpoint would be and write a claim that disputes it. For the first one we'll do together, and the second one I'll have you guys do on your own. The first one, our thesis is that disobedience is a valuable human trait that promotes social progress. So first of all, what is the opposing viewpoint here? Well, there are two potential opposing viewpoints. Our opposing viewpoint that we address could be that disobedience is detrimental to social progress, right? Because that would be the opposite claim, the opposite thesis. Or that disobedience has no effect on social progress. Both of these counteract our thesis that it's a valuable human trait that promotes social progress, right? So our opposing viewpoint could be that it's detrimental or that it has no effect. So let's say we go with the first one here. How would we dispute this opposing viewpoint? If this was the opposing viewpoint we were trying to argue against, that disobedience is detrimental to social progress, how would we dispute that? How would we say that's not true? Well, something like this. However, this argument is flawed because it fails to acknowledge the numerous times throughout history that disobedience has led to positive change. And then the rest of this paragraph would be giving evidence and commentary about how it fails to acknowledge that, or about something like that. Honestly, we could even make our claim more general and just say, however, this argument is flawed because it fails to acknowledge. We could even just say, honestly, however, this argument's flawed, and that could be our claim. And then this could be part of our evidence, right? We don't need to be super specific if we don't need to. We can be, right? This is a good claim. However, this argument is flawed is also a perfectly fine claim, honestly. We just want to make sure we are completely clear that we think this opposing viewpoint is bad or wrong or not true, and we make it completely clear that we are about to talk about why it's not true. Let's go ahead, take a look at the second one, see if you can identify an opposing argument, and then come up with a claim that disputes it. Pause the video, work on this, unpause when you are done. Okay, so again, I think there are two potential opposing viewpoints here. Our thesis is freedom of speech is an integral element of a free and progressive society. The opposing viewpoint could be freedom of speech is detrimental to a free and progressive society, or freedom of speech is unimportant to a free and progressive society. And the way we kind of dispute this might change depending on which of these opposing viewpoints we are addressing, right? We can pick whichever one we want to address. But if we were going with the first one, we could dispute it by saying this argument is unfounded because in a true free market of ideas, the more popular idea among the people will always beat out the harmful ideas. And that would be talking about, disputing the idea that it's detrimental. I was about to ask if anyone had any questions. I need to retrain my brain a little bit for these. But yeah, that is how opposing viewpoints work. We identify the opposing viewpoint, we dispute the opposing viewpoint, and we provide evidence for why our disputing of the opposing viewpoint is correct rather than the viewpoint itself. Let's write a full body paragraph here that addresses the opposing viewpoint. Our thesis is that self-driving cars are worth investing in as they will be beneficial for humanity in the long run. If you can't tell, I like recycling. I like recycling prompts and theses because we can use things we've already talked about in different contexts, right? So I want you guys to try this first. Write a full body paragraph here that addresses the opposing viewpoint for the following thesis. So there's a couple different components you need here, right? First, you need to acknowledge the opposing viewpoint. Then you need to state a claim that states that the opposing viewpoint is wrong, that disputes the opposing viewpoint. And then you need evidence and commentary the same way as any other body paragraph. Pause this video, Take as much time as you need. Give it a shot. Unpause when you are done. All right. Here is my example. Some people may argue that self-driving cars are not worth investing in because people will not be willing to accept the change and give up control. Okay, that is the opposing viewpoint that I've chosen to argue here. The thesis is that self-driving cars are worth investing in as they will be beneficial for humanity. The opposing viewpoint is that they are not worth investing in because people will not be willing to accept the change and give up control of their vehicle. My claim. Looking at the history of technological innovation, however, can prove that this is not true. There's the claim. The claim is that when we look at the history of technological innovation, we know that it is not true that people will not be willing to accept the change and give up control. Here's my first piece of evidence. The same thing could have been, and likely was, said about the computer in its early days. All right, now we need to explain how this evidence supports our claim. It was a completely foreign concept. It was completely foreign technology to people at the time, but they adjusted. Now there is at least one computer in nearly every United States home. Computers are used for a plethora of tasks that used to be done through other methods, such as writing essays, finding information, communicating with people in faraway places, and so much more. The self-driving car will be no different. Okay, so that's lengthy, I think, lengthy commentary here. But that's fine, right? Your evidence and your commentary can be as long as you need it to be to get the point across, right? I have explained what I mean when I say that the same thing could be said about the computer, and then I've explained why that relates to my claim, right? I bring it back to the self-driving car. It will be no different. People may be hesitant at first, but once they give it a chance and realize how beneficial the new technology is, they will never want to go back. Self-driving cars will replace manual cars the same way that computer replaced the typewriter and the encyclopedia. So I really only use one piece of evidence here. This piece of evidence about the computer, right? However, that piece of evidence is so strong that it's really the only evidence I need, right? We talked about evidence in lesson 1 about how there's no specific number of pieces of evidence you need. You just need evidence that's sufficient to support your claim. In this case, I focused on one piece of evidence only, but my piece of evidence was so strong and I explained it so well that that evidence was enough to support my claim. This one piece of evidence about the computer was so strong, right? Because it's the exact same situation that is occurring in the opposing viewpoint. And since I've mentioned that the computer is now everywhere, and it's replaced the typewriter and the encyclopedia, and I say that self-driving cars will replace manual cars the same way, I've kind of completely supported my claim with just one piece of evidence, which you can do that, right? If that evidence is that strong. So this is how you want to address an opposing viewpoint. You want to immediately take control, right? You acknowledge it, you address it, and you immediately take over and say, here's why it's wrong. And then you spend the entire rest of the paragraph focusing on that. Again, opposing viewpoints never required, but can be beneficial if done well. So let's go through a little bit of a summary here. We've talked about a lot of different ideas here. We've talked about the argument essay. We've talked about some ideas that relate to all of the essays. What I want to do is kind of go through what an argument essay should look like here on the left side. So I've kind of given a format of what your argument essay should look like, a template, if you will, of what your argument essay should look like. This is the first part of my introductory paragraph. This part of my essay should introduce the topic. A good way to do this is with background information, which may be included in the prompt. Then at the end of that first paragraph, this is my thesis, where I clearly express the position I will be arguing. So that's what your first paragraph should look like. From there, you go into the first body paragraph. This is my first body paragraph, and this first sentence is where I state my first claim that supports my thesis. Then you have some evidence that supports the claim. then some commentary that explains the evidence and how it relates to the claim, then some more evidence, then some more commentary. Then at the end, here is some commentary that explains how my claim supports my thesis. And then the second paragraph's the same, right? Except that it's focused on the second claim instead of the first claim. Then the third paragraph may be the same as the first two, the third body paragraph, or perhaps this claim is related to the opposing viewpoint. If it is, I will first introduce the opposing viewpoint, then make a claim about it being incorrect. Then finally, at the end, this is my conclusion. This part of my essay should quickly tie all of my claims and evidence back to the thesis without introducing new information. That's the format. And I kind of color-coded it for you, right? The introduction and the conclusion are in black. The thesis is in red. The claims are in blue. Evidence is in green. Commentary is in purple. And then everywhere not everywhere, in the three body paragraphs, we should have, don't worry about consideration of audience. That's not really super important. In the three body paragraphs, we should have ethos, logos, and or pathos. We should have persuasive diction, and we should have persuasive syntax. That is what a good argument essay will look like. And just a note, you may have more or less than 2 pieces of evidence per claim. The number of pieces of evidence is not important, as we kind of just talked about, as long as your claim is sufficiently supported. Similarly, you can have more or less body paragraphs. 3 is just the highly recommended amount. But yeah. So I know I threw a lot of information at you today. What are the main takeaways from today? What are the most important ideas? Your thesis should present a position on the topic. It's an argument essay. Pick a side and argue it. Nothing neutral. Pick a side. That's how you get that 1 point of the rubric, right? All of your claims should support your thesis, and all of your claims should be supported by evidence. That's kind of the part of the middle part. The other part of the middle part of that rubric, that evidence and commentary block, is that you must include commentary that links your evidence to your claims and links your claims to your thesis. It's not just enough to present claims and to present a thesis and to present evidence. You need commentary that links it all together. You want to use strong, direct, and specific language, right? Diction and syntax. You don't want to use anything vague. You want specific. You don't want to use anything that's kind of unconvincing. You want to be convincing, right? Be definitive. No maybes, no probablys, no sometimeses. Always, every time, definitely. You want to make sure that the reader believes what you're saying. So you want to be convincing about what you have to say. And you may choose to address the opposing viewpoint in your final body paragraph. If you do, be sure to acknowledge it and then promptly present a claim that refutes it. You do not want to give... I don't know how to phrase this. You do not want to give credit to the opposing argument. You do not want to give the opposing argument any time to shine. You want to bring it up and then immediately be like, here's why it's wrong. It's not true. Here's why it's bad. Here's everything that's bad about it. And rhetorical appeals as well, right? You want to, based on the evidence that you're using, you can choose which rhetorical appeals you want to use: ethos, logos, pathos, or some combination of all of them. And that is all I have for you guys for lesson 2. In lesson 3, we will talk about the rhetorical analysis essay. So yeah, thank you guys for giving me your time. Hopefully this is helping you out. And I will figuratively see you in lesson 3.